What's going on, guys? It's Matt from Adventures, and today I'm going to be doing a review of the NatureHike Mongar 2 person tent. This is an amazing budget tent from China. Now, I know a lot of you guys are going to have reservations thinking, yeah, it's a Chinese tent, the build quality is probably a bit lower, but this is going to be a full review telling you all the pros and cons I found after 2 years of using it, and I'm just going to let you know from now, this is one of my absolute favorite budget tents. So let's jump right into it. First thing you'll notice is just how small and light this tent is for a 2-person tent. It is a full-on 2-person, so you can sit fully upright in it and it's not going to cram you down. And you're going to notice that I did get the bright green color scheme. They've got a few other options. They've got purple, white, black. But I chose this one because it's bright, it catches people's attention. Also good in any sort of survival situation, so I just tend to prefer this personally. And it is only 2.4 kilos, which when you're doing any sort of backpacking or cycling expedition is an absolute wonder. First off, the tent comes with its own ground mat just underneath. This is going to protect the base of the tent and just make sure it doesn't get scratched up on rocks and make it lose any of its waterproofing. This is a really good thing to come in extra. It comes in free with the tent. I love it. It just adds a little bit of extra security, knowing that you can pitch your tent on a lot of different types of ground and not have to worry about ripping, scratching or tearing. Number 2 are the pegs, and the pegs themselves are very lightweight aluminium pegs. They are versatile in the sense that they will go into quite a few different terrains except for rock where they will start to bend, and the lightness means that they don't take up a lot of space. So if you're pitching on soil or anything like that, it's going to be absolutely fine. But also this tent does have its own support system, so it can be pitched without using the pegs. You can tie it into rocks, or if the day isn't windy, just leave your stuff inside and it should be absolutely fine. Next up, of course, are the poles, and this tent has a very special pole setup. It is in fact a monopole, so we don't have any 2 crossing poles. It's one pole that forks off into a Y at both sides to provide more than enough stability and rigidity, and it even works well in the wind and all sorts of other scenarios. So it's one pole, you don't have to worry about having multiple or seeing which pole goes where. It's super easy. Last but not least, we have the inner tent and the canvas, which roll up into a really nice snug package, and you can pitch just one of these. So you can just have the inner tent with a full-on mesh, or have the inner tent with the outer tent as well. Let's get to pitching it and I'll show you as we go along. This area over here is clear enough, and I am going to be first placing down my bottom sheet. Now this tent can be pitched fairly simply with just one person. If it's a windy day, you might want a second pair of hands because that's going to make your life a whole lot easier. But today, Julia's behind the camera, so I have to do this all by myself. Now you can have a bit of an idea about the footprint of the tent. It doesn't look too huge, but it is more than enough for 2 people. In fact, like a full-on inflatable mattress will fit very comfortably inside this tent. Next up, I'm going to get the inner tent from here that I've rolled up inside, and I'm going to lay it just flat over the ground mat. At this point, it's already time to get the poles and just set up super quick. So the poles are in this bag, well, or should I say the singular pole. These poles are super light, and they just snap together very easily as well. They are made of aluminium, so that means they're lightweight but still sturdy and flexible, which means they're going to take a good beating if it gets too windy or if you're facing any sort of adverse weather conditions. As you can see, they just pop in all magnetically. Makes life a lot easier when you're setting up. And that is one side, so that's 3 out of 4. And the final part just requires one more clip right there. And the other side, I noticed, just came undone, so we'll make sure that that's in as well. And there you've got the setup done for the base. Now lifting this up is as easy as doing the clips. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the exact same thing on the other side. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, as you can see, the tent still is outwards facing, but with just one simple clip, we can grab this side, and that way everything is sticking nice and upright. Now you might notice that there's a lot of similarity in this tent to much more expensive MSR tents, and that is because the design pretty much is exactly the same. This one is more of a summer tent. If you notice, it's got a full mesh lining all the way, and this is just more than enough to sleep like this. At least if you're not in a humid environment which is going to get you full of dew in the morning. We've slept like this in a lot of places, including in deserts, which allows a really nice breeze to flow through. Plus you have an amazing view of the stars. What more could you want? Now here in Malta, even though it's super hot, we do have a lot of humidity, and that's why you're going to want to put up the canvas or the fly sheet. Now it's also very good for rain, especially in warmer climates. It's going to be fairly waterproof. We've taken this thing through storms, and even when the water has risen up to about this level, it stayed fairly dry. Of course, you're always going to have that little bit of water seeping through, but overall we managed to stay dry and stay comfortable, and we only noticed it was raining when we woke up in the morning. Now I'm going to jump in so you can get a better idea of the size. Now I'm about 175 centimeters, fairly average size for a guy. So let's jump in and see how this tent does. Whoa! As I said before, I am not graceful at all, but come inside. So as you can see, I've got more than enough space to sit up. I've got a lot of clearance from my head. I can put something like my phone up there and my wallet back there. I'll hang up my lantern over here and everything works fine. Now, of course, this is detachable should you wish to not have it there and have just that extra headroom, or you want a clearer view of the sky. But I like to have it there. I find it so convenient, especially just to leave those things that I would want in the middle of the night, especially if I'm sleeping next to someone and I don't want to wake them up. I can just easily, reach up, grab what I want and go out. That's also the nice thing about having two doors. You can just literally open up and exit from either side of the tent. Plus, it's super easy with this tent to just roll up the door and tie with the loop system, keeping it up and out of the way so you can have it fully open all the time. Works really well, and you've got the same system on the fly sheet. Now I'm going to set up the fly sheet and show you what this tent is like fully pitched. So we've seen the tent from the inside. Now let's go fully covered up with the fly sheet as well. This fly sheet is symmetrical, so you can throw it on either way. I'm just going to do this and get it over the tent, and then we've just got to clip it down with those same 4 corner tabs that we used for the ground mat and the inner sheet. So just clip these clips on and make sure nothing is snagging, because we don't want to risk tearing any of the fabric. Of course, to make such a light tent, one of the things you have to take into consideration is the fabric. You cannot afford to use obviously the thickest fabric to make these sort of tents, just for the simple reason that the thicker the fabric, the heavier the tent. So this, although it is coated and it is nylon fabric on the top and it is completely waterproof, I still wouldn't give too much abuse to it, just for the risk of I don't want to rip this thing. And I'm going to keep going around with the tabs just to make sure everything is nice and tight. Pull everything down, make sure it's neat, and we've got one last clip to do, which is this one right over here, to make sure that everything is stretched out, because the last thing you want is your tent rattling and clanking in the middle of the night. Boom. Okay, that is done, and zip everything down. Now, as it is, this tent is windproof and waterproof, but you do have the option to get some ventilation in here with just this little strap. It's a very rudimentary design, a relatively hard strap that will just open up for some airflow, and if there's a nice breeze going through, that's going to make it really nice and pleasant inside the tent as well. Now, what you can do, of course, is you peg down the tent from these corners. You also have the guy ropes over here, and to keep the doors pulled further out, you can peg these down just like that, and that is going to give you more than enough space to fit a rucksack, your boots, or any of the other gear you're going to be using in the morning that you don't want to get wet left outside the tent. Unfortunately, because this is just a 2-man tent, you don't have enough space inside for 2 people plus all their gear, but within the vestibules there is enough space to have at least like a 60-litre rucksack, a pair of boots, and your bare essentials. which, to be honest, if you're doing lightweight backpacking, is more than enough. Of course, one more thing with this tent is that everything does roll up, so if you want to have the top on for rain cover, for example, but you still want to have that breeze or that view, you can very easily just take the tent, roll up the sides, and again put them on those clips that we had talked about earlier. They're exactly the same system as what's used inside. Very easy to use, very quick to deploy, and quick to release as well if you need to. So let's talk about price and pros and cons of having this tent. First of all, it costs about 150 euros, that's about $175 wherever you are in the world, of course. I bought this one in particular from AliExpress, but you can find it from all sorts of retailers like Amazon and eBay. I will link it in the description below. Every time you purchase one of these or any of the other things in my links, of course, that does help me out a little bit because I am an affiliate with both Amazon and AliExpress. But I will only recommend products that I use myself and that I have tried and tested, because there's nothing worse than going out for a camping trip and finding out that your gear is going to let you down. So first, let's talk about one of the most important things, which is weight. Coming in at about 2.4 kilos, this tent is one of the top in its class, especially in its price category. It is very light, very compact, and very easy to set up. You're not going to have a lot of weight in your bag if you keep this. In fact, I keep it strapped to the bottom of my rucksack, and it is very comfortable. It doesn't bounce around. It's not one of those hefty tents. All the parts and components have seemed to be made in a way that is the perfect compromise of structural rigidity and weight savingness. So including the thin canvas, the mesh outside, the aluminium poles, and the ground mat and the pegs, everything works together in a way that keeps this tent at a mere 2.4 kilos. Next, we're going to talk about the ease of setting it up. Of course, it is one of the simplest tents to set up just because it doesn't require pegging. It's got that amazing monopole. The only thing that I can say is it comes in 3 layers. You've got the mat, the inner, and the outer that all need to be set up separately. And if you want to do a perfect job of it, you have to spend that little bit of extra time to be finicky. For example, inside here, which I didn't show you, there are a couple of cords that you can tie down. There are all the guys that can be pegged out, but that is something that I found actually doesn't always need to be done. And in fact, most of the time, I'm more than happy with the tent setup just as it is. If we're going into windy or rainy days when we feel like setting up is going to be a little bit more problematic, of course, one of the biggest issues is that you first have to set up the inner tent, which is full mesh. So that means if it's raining, you're setting up the mesh, which is going to get the water inside the tent. But again, you've only got about a minute or 2 to do that before you can get the fly sheet up and over it. So that depends on your speed and how much you value everything staying bone dry. Now, I for one do value that, so I will always try to find a gap in the rain or a sheltered part under the trees, and it tends to work out fairly well considering how quickly this is set up. Of course, you just want to take that into consideration. If the place you're going to be camping or hiking in the most is a very wet, windy and rainy environment, this might not be the tent for you. It is the ideal tent for summer, for hot weather, for especially quick trips where you just want to set up, strike and go home. It's perfect for all those sort of things. And if you do manage to set it up before the rain, it will do a perfect job of keeping you dry all night long. Next up, and one of my final points about this tent, is its rigidity and how well built it is. For a Chinese tent, again, at the 150 euro price point, I cannot complain at all about the build quality. Everything feels very smooth, everything feels like it just fits and works together. I do think it is quite comparable to the MSR, which retails for 300 to 500 euros depending on where you are and where you're buying it, and I think it is a really good alternative to that. If we look at the outer sheet, it is pretty thin, but it has stood up to a lot of abuse, a lot of wind, a lot of rain, and it's kept me dry and kept me warm all throughout. Now, when I say warm, that's another thing to mention. This is not an insulated tent. As you can see, loads of mesh all the way through, so the insulation is not designed to keep you warm as such, but it does shelter you from the wind and the elements in a pinch. This is not something I would take, for example, on an ice expedition where I want to keep as much of my body heat inside as I can. I'd go for something more like a tunnel tent with full insulation and 2 layers. That is going to make me feel a lot more warm and comfortable. This has its place. This, I would say, is a 2 to 3 season tent depending on where you are in the world. Again, other build quality parts that sometimes are a bit iffy. The poles are fantastic. They fit in really smoothly. They're magnetic as well, which means they just clip in like clockwork. You don't have to put much thought or effort into it, and because there's only a monopole, that means that you don't have to stay worrying about putting things in the right place or the right orientation. It's very much just get up, put it together, and see where it fits. It's gonna fit for sure. In the wind, when it's like this, it does tend to wobble a little bit, but once you've got everything guyed down as tight as it gets, you have no problems whatsoever. Recently I've taken this tent in 40 to 50 km/h winds, and it did not feel it, when other tents we had that were higher up or had less of a support structure actually started breaking and snapping poles. This one stood there like nothing was going on. As for the inside, I haven't so far had a rip. The only thing I've noticed is at some points the mesh does tend to scrunch up a little bit, like it starts to unpick, but I haven't noticed anything very serious, and it's all fixed up with just a little bit of care, maybe some tape. It doesn't really affect it. I haven't seen it continue to rip, just a little bit of scrunching, and it's still fine. Now this is after 2 years of use, so it is to be expected. Anything is going to get worn. You can also easily find patches and repair kits, so if you do get a rip in your canvas, that shouldn't be a problem to fix either. Anyway, that's been my review of the NatureHike Mongar 2 tent. I hope you like it, and if you'd like to try it out for yourself, I'm going to be putting a link down in the description below. It is one of my absolute favorite tents, especially for the price. I do like to try out these cheaper options and see if they are worth it or if they are just a complete rip-off because they're going to break. And this one, so far, has very much lived up to and surpassed my expectations. It's kept me warm, it's kept me dry, and it's made me one very happy camper for so many nights. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.